Hello and welcome to today's Practice as Research seminar as part of the seminar series for the Practice as Research Network. My name is Nicole Brown and I'm really excited to have with us today Dr. Tricia King. I'm particularly excited because we were actually able to manage a relatively feasible time for both of us, given that Tricia is from the University of the Sunshine State. So it's something that is quite sort of, yeah, down under, quite a lot of time zones away, but not quite 12 hours. So that's quite good to know. And Tricia is going to talk to us today about listening with images, photography as a method in creative practice research. Dr. Tricia King is a researcher in the creative arts health, specializing in innovative approaches to enhancing older adults' well-being through participatory visual methodologies. Her work employs lens-based techniques like photovoice and collaborative photography to explore and amplify the lived experience of older adults, challenging visual ageism and promoting social connection. And obviously the link to the photography, the photo voice and the collaborative photography is the part that I was particularly interested in, given my own work as well. This fortnightly program, among her projects, Dr. King founded the community-led Aging Well Creative Lab, where she develops interdisciplinary programs that bridge creativity, technology and social engagement. And this is a fortnightly program that introduces older adults to cutting-edge technologies, including augmented reality, photographic editing and drone photography, fostering intergenerational learning and technology empowerment. And that's something that I was particularly fascinated about. So Tricia is very active as a founding member of Creative Ecology's research cluster, of the healthy aging research cluster. So she's constantly working. She's also a convener of the Australian Association of Gerontologists Creativity, Art and Design Special Interest Group. And she's a national leader of the Student and Early Career Researcher Communications Working Group. You can see she's a busy person, really, which makes it even more exciting and for me more being more grateful that she's found the time to talk to us today. I'm going to hand over, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand over to Tricia. Please do feel free to put any comments or questions that you may have in the chat. We can raise those afterwards. But with no further ado, the floor is yours, Tricia. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so very much. Let me get my PowerPoint up and running. I really do appreciate the invitation to chat with you all today. Let me just, sorry, my PowerPoint now doesn't want to play ball. Excellent.
That's it. Yes, we can see that.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming along to the seminar today. As Nicole said, my name is Tricia King. I'm a lecturer in photography and a visual researcher working predominantly with older adults. And look, I really appreciate the invitation to talk today. I'm totally thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to see so many wonderful people in the room as well. Now, as Nicole mentioned, I am based in Australia, so I'd like to start by acknowledging the always owners of the land on which I'm standing and pay respects to our First Nations custodians for their care of country over the past 60,000 years, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded. So I'm from Gubbi Gubbi country on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. The campus that I work on here is pretty spectacular. I look out my windows, there's kangaroos, there's native birds, and it's really reflective of the care that's been given to this country by our custodians. But what I always feel as a photographer is that it's really important that as I acknowledge country, to share an image by a First Nations photographer as well, so that we can all actively listen to the voice and concerns and show new audiences their work so that you can go explore themselves. This is the work created by the legendary, he's such a legend, Wayne Quilliam, and of course the work he creates is really important to the representation of older First Nations people. His Instagram is on the screen. Please do go follow him. So today I'm going to talk about my own creative practice as research projects and the methods that I use as part of that work. So I have two types of creative practice projects, research projects that I'm working on. My own work as an artist and my work as a facilitator. So my own work as a creative practice research artist, this is an example on what you're seeing on screen. I do a collaboration with First Nations artist Lyndon Davis and an ecoacoustic scholar, Dr. Leah Barclay. And what we do is we use cymatics to put the call of Indigenous totems, in this case, the black cockatoo, through the photographs of the birds to create these responsive cymatic patterns. And then they end up becoming these large-scale video installation works. But within my scholarly work, I work in the discipline of creative aging and photographic studies to use variations of lens-based practices to investigate how creativity itself can help older adults to feel connected socially, environmentally, to place and within themselves. But let me start telling you a little bit about myself. I first walked into a dark room under the stairs in my school when I was around 8 or so, and I was mesmerized by the image emerging in the developer. And I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And I've been pretty lucky that aside from a stint working in record stores, I've been able to do this with my life. And I find it no less mesmerizing today, many years later. So I began to photograph bands and fashion. I did some council and library work, commercial clients, and I built up this really nice portfolio of commercial clients, which was fun. And then I did some weddings, which was super duper fun for the first 5 or 6 years, I should say. I often photographed 50 weddings a year in some pretty excellent spaces. And every Saturday night was a party filled with family celebrations. But I always used to head straight to the grandparents and the great-grandparents to see what images I could create which would make them happy. The couple just wanted, the cool bridal portraits, but the grandparents, they knew the value of bringing all of the family together and the candid moments that they had between generations. So I've always been drawn to the voices and experiences of our older family members. And then a friend asked me if I'd create some documentary work for her nationally funded ARC research project, which was being led by Professor Yvonne Miller, to create images for the Inside Aged Care project, which used photovoice, poetry, interviews, and documentary photographs to explore what was working in aged care. So I collaborated with some lovely folks to create images which were truly memorable for not only for me, but for the residents themselves, because many of them hadn't been photographed for quite a while. And so they loved having photographed and sharing conversations around being photographed. And every time I walked into someone's room, I saw photographs everywhere. And look, I knew that my truth was a love of photography, but I realized then that, photographs are really important to so many people. We collect them, we curate them, we share them, we treasure them, we take them across our life course with us, we talk about them, we remember through them. So they're a moment that we've captured in the past, which is positioned for us in the future. And they are so incredibly important. So Yvonne loved my photographs, and she suggested I consider doing a PhD exploring the role of photographs in the lives of older adults, which I jumped upon. And within 5 years or so, I had transitioned from being a full-time commercial photographer and documentary photographer to a researcher and now a senior lecturer in photography. So I did my PhD work looking at using photographic methods in aged care, which is really a place that the camera rarely enters. And I work with these fabulous older adults to talk about what photographs meant to them, how they use them, how they share them. And then we work together to create new photographs. Now, since then, I've expanded this practice considerably, as I'll talk to. And I've connected so many people, both my older people in my research and my younger people in my university teaching, with photographic practice, which is really what I see as my life's work, is connecting people to the love of photography and photographic practices. So that's my journey, and that's got me to where I am today. But why tell you about this? Why not just jump straight into the work? And it's because I feel it's important, because a photographer's positionality really shapes the story that they tell. Because photography is subjective. It's not only about making choices about what you include and what you leave out, it's about how you've been raised. It's about the ideas you've been exposed to and what your truths are. The photograph displays the photographer's perceptions and experiences, and it reflects our assumptions and our biases as well. So it's really important to acknowledge what we bring to this sort of work, and it's important that we remain reflective of this as we're using photographic practices. And look, we're all smart enough to know that photographs aren't reality, aren't the direct truth. Cameras aren't truth machines. The camera is really a mechanical object that records light. But at every stage of the way, from how we record the light, which images we select, how we create them, how we choose to display them, and then how we as viewers read the photographs, is a long series of choices. So again, we have to be mindful of how we read and interpret images too. And this is really important when we're doing photographic analysis work. However, it's this very subjectivity which positions photography and photographic practice perfectly to explore the lived experiences, to answer questions, to raise discussions, and to really help shape meaning and create understanding. So photography, I would argue, can be considered a meaningful activity and an excellent facilitator for research. It's an activity which is suited to an individual, it's engaging, it's enjoyable, it's goal related, it's linked to identity and mindset, and it's inherently social too. And the tools to create photographs are now more accessible than ever before. Photography as an activity has been removed from the need to have specialist equipment now that we have phones and iPads and tablets. We all have the ability to create photographs, and with very little exception, we all understand and have already engaged in the process of either creating a photograph, being in a photograph, and seeing a photograph. Even the most senior people that I work with have done this. And unlike creative activities which we might engage our participants in during our research, there is little perceived skill required. And I say this with my tongue firmly in my cheek as a professional photographer. But you don't need to feel like you're creative, which is often a barrier for participation in research and creative activities. Oh, I don't know how to paint. I'm not a creative person. I don't like singing because my voice is terrible, so forth. These barriers are generally removed with photography because photography can be done by anyone. It can be observational, it can be deeply personal, it can be engaged with on so many levels. So look, when we talk about creative activity in aging environments, which is where my work is situated, be it community groups or residential aged care facilities, we tend to think of creative practice as a structured activity scheduled in the monthly calendar where residents can opt in and opt out as they see fit, like this painting session you can see on screen or sing-alongs. But they're all really valuable parts of a creative program and a creative life. But what I'm really interested in seeing is how we can use creative practice to make change, to influence a person's way of seeing or being, and from that have a better understanding of a diversity of lived experiences. So the research is the creative practice and the creative practice is the research. So my work's grounded in ways to use photographic practice with older adults, and central to this is the key research question of how we can use the camera as a facilitator to connect to the self, the environment, to place and to each other. And connection to place and community and self are critical to overall well-being and lived experiences. And look, we know this through many studies of people of all generations. However, older adults usually suffer this kind of disconnect to one or many of these areas, which can lead to isolation or depression or reduced activities. And they can be significant inhibitors to leading a happy older life. And indeed, are some of the factors which influence people no longer being able to age in their own home or community. And this in turn really deeply affects their outlook on life should they move to aged care. And we know that an engaged lifestyle is an important component of successful aging. And the key here, and there are many excellent activities which provide immediate relief from this sort of isolation and depression. But the key here, however, is to find a way to make long lasting and transformative impact to a person's way of seeing an overall outlook on life beyond that structured sort of art activity. So creative practice is really well positioned to do this as it draws from so much of the personal, the experience, the lived and the lives of people, which is then embedded in the artwork that they create. And you can see my friend Eric here on screen sharing quite proudly a photograph that he created. And it was accompanied by a story about when he used to work in agriculture and forestry, and he could name all of the plants. So, for the work that I do, and with this particular cohort of people, I feel it's important to be relational and have a solid understanding of relationships as we are sharing work. So, my research is grounded in friendship as method, which is a term coined by Lisa Tillman Healy around 2003, based on feminist principles which require a radical reciprocity in research and moves from studying them to studying us. It removes those hierarchies of the researcher and the research and instead becomes about sharing. And sharing means inclusion, and inclusion is really important for people who might be marginalized or isolated or feeling like they don't have a voice. So we become together. So, friendship and method uses friendship as a collaborative tool to create, to understand, to develop deeper meaning, and to be working together and sharing experiences through our creative practices. And we have that start from a shared space. And you can see on screen here, there are some participants, there's myself as a researcher, there's service providers, my daughter's in there, and normally there's even a minibus driver or someone else from our partner organisation who gets a camera and joins in too. So everybody is included. So, why use photographs in research? Well, images can really elicit a greater level of detail about the emotional meaning of experience rather than words only data collection like interviews or surveys. And indeed, they elicit a different sort of information than standard interviews. Images can trigger memory, can evoke emotional experiences. They allow open expression while having these explicit points of reference in the photograph. They allow us to show the subjectivity and experiences, which we talked about before. They allow us to talk to our lives, our thoughts, our beliefs, our barriers, our hopes, our realities in a way which asking a question might not. So the photograph becomes a form of communication. And this is true of all the core methodologies that I'm going to explore today. Some of the core methodologies I use across my work is photo elicitation, photo voice, and collaborative photography, but kind of. I use adapted versions. So my work is more like a hybrid of all these methods that I'll talk to shortly. And these are all methods in which the researcher hands the camera over or the decision making over to the participant and allows them to create images or select the images to use. So you're transferring that authority to your participants and allowing them through their creative work to drive the research. So the participant really drives and guides the direction of the research, and thus it really ensures that authenticity. So all of these methods are underpinned by participatory action framework, and they draw into ethics of care, relationship building, and reciprocity. They are all dialogical. So each approach is about facilitating discussions and conversations. They involve critical reflection on both the part of the participant and the researcher. However, I would say that these methods are traditionally predominantly outcome focused. So they look to generate insights into a topic or an experience. But what I'm really interested is the process of creation using these photographic methods and the insights that the participants and myself are gaining through the practice of creation. Thus, I see the work as both data and creative practice intersecting. So, photo elicitation really underpins all of my work. It is talking with photographs. Now, this is the core way of dialoguing about images, which is generally the final stage for all the photographic methods, no matter how the images themselves were created. So the photographs become this jump off point for conversation, and you start by literally talking to what is in the image. But generally, it's kind of the bits around what is in the image is where the really insightful conversation comes. And when we think about photographs, they're really one of the few things which people do take across their life course. We treasure them, we frame them, we stick them up, we put them in books, and we share our photographs. If our house was to burn down, I'd say that's one of the things most people would run to first, although I guess now people run more to grab their hard drives than their prints. But when you enter people's room in aged care, they will have their photographs everywhere. And they are the ones that they've been selected and curated as the images which are on display for a reason. Or it could go the other way, and we could think about what is not on display. An example. This is Margaret. She had one image in her room, this picture of her on her first day of nursing. Now, Margaret was a lifelong nurse. She was really proud of her career giving to others. And this image was mounted on the wall above her chair that we see her sitting in here, so she can't see the image. but it's not for her. It's for the medical staff to let them know that she knows her stuff. It was her using the image to pull rank over them as the more experienced and certainly capable of making her own decisions. And that's how Margaret was using her photographs. On the flip side, this is Clarissa. So she had a room filled with images of her children, and she'd point to them and say they did this to her, as in they put her in a home. So anyone would come into her room and say, oh, look at your beautiful children. She used them images to then express her distress. But then she had this photograph that was just for her in her wallet. And this is the love of her life, Jacko. Now, it took me about 6 months of trust before she showed me this image. And this image was special and it was for her to see, not to talk about with other people. It was just for her. So photo elicitation was coined by John Collier in 1957. He expanded on the work of Bateson and Mead, who were the first to apply pictures of research as a tool in their studies during the 30s. Harper then expanded upon this in 2002, embedding it as a research method, saying that human beings inherently respond to images and text in different ways. And Harper went on to suggest that photo elicitation doesn't simply emit more information, but it evokes different kind of information, accessing the deeper elements of the human consciousness. To me, photo elicitation isn't creative practice per se, but it's a creative research method which is valuable to mention these contexts as it sets up the photograph to tell stories in where they're displayed, how they were displayed, and they're all an important part of that. I'm sure many of you have heard of photovoice. It's another participatory method which uses both photography and dialogue to encourage participants to share their perspective on certain issues or concerns. The camera is handed over to the participant and they create images guided by a prompt or a topic. So photovoice is grounded in participatory action research and feminist theory, prioritizing personal and community change with the hopes of policy and political change. It's not so much a data collection method, but a research framework which uses photographs for the purposes of social transformation. Excuse me. Photographs are the meaningful representations of experiences and they are data in and of themselves. And this means that photographs are not simply to aid conversations or stimulate thoughts, that they're actually artifacts that analyze together. And this leans into what we were talking about earlier as photography as subjective, emotive, and reflecting the personal. And this is great when we're using it to elicit data about lived experiences. Whilst we've been handing over the cameras to participants for many years, the concept of photo voice was recently developed by Wang and Burris in their 1994 article, which described participatory photography with rural women in China, which they called photonovella. And as you can see in the image here, they asked women to document their daily lives, allowing them to talk to and document issues which could then be raised at several women's federations and communicated to policymakers and donors in their own communities. They write that when taking this image to community, women from almost every village reacted strongly to this photograph of the woman weeding in her cornfield as her baby girl lay beside her. This image was virtually universal to their own experiences. The photograph was a lightning rod for the women's discussion on their burdens and their needs. And in 1997, Wang and Burris took the photonovella method and coined the term photo voice. And since then, it's been used very, very widely across a range of projects with different communities. And they developed these 3 key criteria around enabling people to record and reflect their community's strengths and concerns, promoting critical dialogue and knowledge, and reaching policymakers. And whilst photo voice does remove that hierarchy of researcher and researched, it allows the participants themselves to record and discuss their concerns. And that's the ultimate aim of having this to reach policymakers. And this is usually done through public display of the photographs themselves in a public exhibition. So photo voice is usually actioned by giving your participants a prompt. What's daily life like for you? What stops you from going to the shops? What makes your mealtime special? And then ask them to photograph this. Excuse me. I've been teaching all day, so I'm all talked out. You then get them to select their top 5 or top 10 for discussion, or perhaps you print out everything and they've done and get them to select the prints. It's really up to you. Then you either work one-on-one with the participants, or I found this method to be a paramount value. You get everybody together to discuss their images using those photo elicitation techniques. And from this discussion, themes will emerge, and you might be able to get the participants to group the images and see what themes come out. This is a truly authentic way of analysing the data, and the participants are working through their concerns and their themes and making decisions together. So the work I'm doing now is a hybrid of these methods. It takes that core of creating photographs and core of talking to photographs, but positions them firmly in the personal and about the act of creation. And whilst these methods are very much about the outcome, be it the stories they tell or the images they created, what I'm most interested in is the act of doing and being and creating. So when I use photovoice, it's not to get a topic of conversation in the ear of policymakers. It's about the process of creating and how this influence the individual. And so, at the heart of my work and the heart of what I really want to delve into is the way you can use photography as creative practice research to unpack experience and shape futures. So, collaborative photography is something I'm developing where we share the experience of creating photographs, usually on a photo walk or something similar. And this is a good way to build a collective narrative with your participants, engage in walking interviews, which become then this lovely triangulation between the participant, the researcher, and place. In this sense, photography allows you to experience the moment, to slow down, to consider, and to think. You see space, you experience togetherness, and you really think about your relationship to the world through the lens of the camera. And it really forces you to slow down and explore those similar, smaller elements. And as you can see in the image, I use this technique to bring people together. So we all go out on a photo walk. We're all in the same physical space, but we see things really differently. And when we finish the walk, we come back, we look at the images, and everyone builds their collective narrative, but through their own individual vision. So it fosters togetherness through individuality. So it has the ethos of photo elicitation in the discussion, the practice of handing the camera over to allow the participants to drive the research, but it enables the participants to build this collective story by coming together with their own unique vision. And encouraging people to notice the world as they walk with the camera flows into daily life, where people then start to embed seeing differently in their everyday world. I have one participant who sends me images daily, pointing out the leading lines and the color contrasts and the small shadows. And he enjoys the way that he sees the world now because he's not just looking, he's really seeing. So, the Creativity and Movement Project was established by myself and my colleagues to be an accessible and meaningful activity which enabled participants to come together, to be creative, to share stories, make connections. But we've started to see some really transformative outcomes beyond this structured activity. It's an interdisciplinary project which mixes quantitative health data. So, Dan Wadsworth does timed up and goes, shortfalls, rapid assessment of physical activity, with qualitative, creative, and lived experiences. And so once a week for an hour over an 8-week period, we brought together small groups to go on these photo walks. And these walks are designed to get people up and out of the house, be creative, and being active. We all have cameras, we go on the walk together, we talk, we create photographs, we move, and we share experiences. So the sessions take the form of walking, creating, remembering, imagining, and seeing. They are shared experiences, they invoke memory and conversations, they shape discussions about what's important about life and living, and they allow the participants to think about their relationship to place and to each other. So, our first iteration of this was run in aged care, a space which, in and itself, is often a difficult space for many people as it's their uncomfortable new home. But it's often a space that they haven't chosen to go to themselves or they haven't selected themselves. And there's this disconnect between the person and the place in aged care. So, we were hoping we could use the project to help people explore the quiet beauty in spaces and see their home through a different lens. And when we undertook this project in aged care, we walked around the gardens each week. And for many people, they'd not been outside for quite a while because they had no real purpose to being outside. And even when we worked inside and we looked at something like, for instance, patterns, we had one participant say that she would lie in bed at night and think about the wonderful patterns that she'd previously overlooked, which she would then like to photograph. And she went down to the dining room the next day and said she'd never seen her space like this. It was a whole new room that she'd learned to see differently through the patterns. And we realized that we were changing the way people see. So here's a few words from two of our aged care participants, Joyce and Kathleen. And you can hear that they're starting to talk not only about the activity, but the way that doing this, this creative practice research had changed the way that they see.
I thought my life was over. And when you and Dan came along, you gave me new life. It was just marvellous. The friendship from you both, Dan and I clicked and you clicked, and we had a lovely time. And I loved taking the photos. Now, instead of me just thinking here and moping, I sit here now and think, oh, I could take one of that, I could photo this, and I look forward to the next day. Not only that, it's sort of brought a few of us here more together because they want to know what we're doing and how we're going, and I've showed a lot of them on photos. It's given me a new lease of life. They're giving me something to think about.
Well, the benefit I've got is the enjoyment. I'm meeting more people and seeing places in here that I've never seen before. But to me, it's brought on a whole new way of looking at life, actually, and taking more of an interest in life, I suppose.
A new way of looking at life and taking more of an interest in life is pretty phenomenal to hear. So our second and third iteration of the project involved people living in community who were transported to a central location by our partners, Comlink Australia. And here are some of the wonderful images from our participants. And you can see the care and attention to image creation, the mindfulness of their photographic practice, and their ability to notice these small moments of joy, like tire tracks or shadows or juxtaposing colors, because that's what photography is really good for. It makes you slow down, it makes you notice, it makes you consider. And that's really truly what I love about photography. It's a wonderful way to live life. Life doesn't have to be about these big moments. It can be as simple as those beautiful orange flowers against a clear blue sky. So through creative practice research, the participants were able to guide the research direction and start to unpack how creativity could change their relationship to place and inspire the awe of looking at life with a new perspective. The lasting impact of the project is that our participants use creative practice to explore and see differently, and they are seeing the environment around them, not just looking. And the world is no longer a place to rush through, but is now filled with small, meaningful moments which inspire new associations and open up new worlds. And these changes in mindset inform everyday practices which shape our relationship to the environment and to the world. Being with the world and focusing on the act of seeing makes the everyday familiar become discoverable. And our participants have told us that they take joy in seeing things that nobody else have seen, like these little moments of joy could be as simple as lines and patterns or shadows of skies and the joy of friends. And many of the participants have connected through photographic practice and have kept in touch with each other. All of the participants we know still continue to create photographs. So one of the most important elements to all of this, different ways of using photographs, is sharing and discussion. And at the end of every project, be it photovoice or collaborative photography, coming together and using photo elicitation techniques is really key. And the photographs exist as their own entity, which we can look at and analyze, but the real information comes in the robustness of the projects come from the way the participants get together and discuss and curate them. And after each session, I either quickly load them onto a digital screen or I print them out and deliver them at the start of the session the following week. Both works, but I must say, giving your participants prints of the work is really valuable. So this was a result of giving prints to our residents in aged care. They started to gift their prints, and giving isn't something that many people are able to do in aged care. They just don't have a place to buy things, to make things, to create things, to gift things. And they would put them up on the doors of their fellow residents, and soon all of the hallway became an art gallery. So Joyce, who we heard from before, would wheel herself in her wheelchair to the different people's rooms. She'd ask them if they wanted some photographs. She'd bring out her big box of photographs. She'd let them go through and select, and then she'd reach up as high as she could from her wheelchair and blue tack them up. And you can see they're all crooked because she's done it from her wheelchair, which just melts my heart. She talked about how she was bringing the outside inside for those people who were unable to connect with the outside themselves. And that was purely beautiful that this became her driver. She was using creative practice to fill a void of giving that had been removed from her for so many years. Now, I should close off by saying at the end of the project, nobody wanted it to end. They enjoyed seeing differently, experiencing the world, creating, and really seeing where the creative process led them. So now, each fortnight, I run the Aging Well Creative Lab on campus, where we come together and we do creative work. Here we are making cyanotypes. The crew has grown larger than our original participants. We have new members almost every week. The direction is entirely shaped by the needs of the group. They quickly decided they wanted to explore new technologies. So we have taken them out on a boat to whale photograph and drop hydrophones in the oceans to listen to whales. They've created videos. They've done augmented reality images. They've flown drones. They've made 3D printers. I taught them how to airdrop, and so now every session they randomly send me images to my computer throughout the entire session because they know how to airdrop now. And look, some of these folks haven't been out since their partner passed, or they'd overcome an illness and they'd sort of lost sight of what they enjoyed doing. But through this work, they've been able to discover that again. And now we have members catching up each week outside the session. 2 recently went on holiday together. A couple of them are dating, so Trisha King dating service. So as you can see, this practice-led research is really a lovely collaboration, and collaboration is absolutely the key to how I approach my research. So hopefully this has given you an overview of how you can use the camera to lead your research, to create, to question, to uncover, but most of all to do this together with your participants and really listen with images. My website, Collaborative Photography, is in development. It's up, but you can read some about some of the projects there. It's constantly evolving. I'll end it there because I'm at time, if not over. Thank you very much for your time today listening. I'll end show and stop screen sharing.
Thank you
Yes.
very, very much, Trisha. This was really exciting. I can see that there's a virtual round of applause already. So thank you really, really so much. It's really interesting.
you.
I do have some questions myself, but I don't necessarily want to hog the conversation. So if anybody else has got any questions, do let it known, so that we can bring you into the conversation. There is one question that I would like to field from the chat already, and this was a question about using photovoice as a conceptual framework, but specifically for autoethnography. The person who's asking is doing an autoethnographic research project as part of the master's degree, and they are asking, can you use photovoice as a conceptual framework for autoethnography?
I would suggest you absolutely could. As I say, photo voice is quite a larger framework, really about deriving, investigating and deriving, and it informs a lot of things. It's not just about creating images. So I would absolutely say autoethnography is a great use of it. It would be an adaptation of photo voice, obviously, because as I said, the key that photo voice, the key principles is really about that community investigation and reaching the hands of policymakers. But I think the basic principles and the way that I use photo voice really lends itself to something like autoethnography. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. And I would largely agree with what you were saying there, is that often, it's not so much about how you do something, but actually how you understand the original intentions of a framework and how you then adapt it. And this kind of leads quite nicely to the next question that's actually from the chat box as well. I would love to hear Trisha's take on the adaptation of photo voice and photo elicitation, especially in the context of justifying the researcher's approach to said adaptation. How much freedom is there to do that from your experience, and what helped you to clearly explain that? The person asking is in the process of analyzing and finalizing their doctoral work, where they use both photo elicitation and photo voice in the context of hermeneutic phenomenology.
Look, I think there is great freedom to adapt. I mean, clearly, I've been doing that. I'm not following the principles. I think that's what, both photo elicitation and photo voice is a great starting place for us to build upon and to adapt to our own needs. In terms of clearly explaining this, I don't know. I reference both of the principles in it. I talk about what it is and what it does, and then talk about my deviation and how it becomes more, because, and as somebody else has said below, to me, I'm using it for that togetherness as well. And I'm using it as a social tool. So I think it's, I think with all methodologies, there's, the ability to adapt and build upon it. So yeah, exactly.
I agree with what you're saying there, Trisha, but I do think that we need to kind of go back to basics as well. And you're doing that in your own work. You do go back to Wang and Burris and you say, well, this is what they've wanted to do. And so you're very, 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 very acutely aware of the origins and how you are messing with them, let's put it that way. And
That's
that,
exactly
I
right.
think that's appropriate, but I do think that, you can't just mess with something without understanding the origins.
That's exactly it. And acknowledging it and saying, like, this is where it's come from, and here is how I am adapting into my and why as well, and why
Yeah.
you're adapting it. And as I say, my research, I mean, I do things that are designed to, I have a number of other projects that are designed to change policy and to change, but these particular projects aren't. They're about changing individual lives. And so acknowledging where it's come from and acknowledging how you're taking these core strengths of it. I think Wang and Burris would be proud of the way that photo voice has been adapted in so many different ways.
Yes, I agree. And actually, I'd like to point in this case, I'm plugging my own book here, but that's
Yeah.
exactly why I wrote that, because so many people are trying to adjust the system that's available and they're struggling with that. So I've kind of talked about, or I'm talking about photo voice as a framework and photo voice as a method. And within the photo voice as a method, you've got a lot more room to maneuver than you have with the photo voice as a framework. So yes, absolutely. Please, we've got a hand up, a virtual one, so I'm going to bring you in, Sitara. Please come on in.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for the session. I couldn't put my words together, so I thought I'll raise my hand and talk. Thank you, first of all, for the beautiful session. And I'm attending from India, from a small place called Chennai. So thanks for the opportunity. And it was a brilliant session. And you're introducing a very unconventional methodology altogether, because a lot of higher education here is still sticking on to the rigid old traditional methods of information collection. So it was an eye opener for us. My question is, I do a lot of participatory observation, because I hesitate a little to call it as autoethnography. I'm still in the process. In case I'm going for field works doing participatory observation, and I also wanted to attach photographs as a method of information collection, will there be an ethical problem? Is there any advices that you would give for someone who goes for field work and does participatory observation? Can this be an additional data collection method? If so, what would be the problems? Lightly on the ethical side, I'm worried about. Thank you.
Yes, and directly you mentioned the word photographs. All of the university ethics committees just go, particularly if you mention photographs and older people. And I also do a lot of work with people living with dementia as well. So I think informed consent is absolutely your starting point. Is making sure that everybody knows how you're going to use the images. Obviously, because the way that I use the photographs, it's as their own creation. So all of my participants want to be named, want to take credit for their work. They want to share it. We have exhibitions. They want to be attached to this work. But when you're using it for photo elicitation, sorry, for photo voice, it may not be such. They may be covering things that they that are sensitive, that they don't want their names attached to. So I think having some sort of discussion with your participants about what they want to reveal of their life. Obviously, I think we as a society see photos as truth. And so if you show a photograph of your house, that is your house and that is your experience. That's how we see things rather than describing it. There are also a number of things that you can do with your participants to ensure the safety of other people, in terms of making sure that they're not photographing other people. And there are a number of things that they can do, hands over the shoulder, things like that. My ethics committee got really nitpicky, and rightfully so. I'm not questioning the ethics process, about when I was using photo elicitation with photographs of their family. They wanted to know how I was going to get consent of the people in the photograph as well. So there are many layers of things to consider. And obviously, many of the people in the photographs had passed on. So I think having those open conversations with your participants about how they're using the work, how you're using the work, how you're interpreting the work is probably a really, the fundamental thing. The other issue that I have found across my research, and it's mostly through using friendship as method and using very personal objects, is that that notion of attachment and getting too close. And there are a couple of really beautiful papers on close but not too close when using friendship as method, being able to put those boundaries in as well, because we still, as much as I talk about friendship and I keep my research going, we still do need to have those boundaries. So working in that way, establishing clear boundaries with your research participants as well. I'm not sure if that quite answered your question, but I hope it went.
I think it answers a lot of the questions already, in terms of like what it is that we have to think about when we're doing work with photographs. One thing that I would like to add that Tricia hasn't mentioned is to think about metadata, especially as we're all using digital photographs these days. There is metadata that's inscribed in the photograph, and that includes, often depending on which gadgets you're using, it often includes the exact GPS data. So if you're not careful and you're saying to your child or to your dementia care patient, for example, take a photograph of your bedroom, we can pinpoint exactly where they live, which is obviously quite problematic. So that's something to consider within the photograph space as well. There's a couple of comments in the chat box that I'd like to pick up on. So one was a comment saying we all in the space may be interested in the work by Melissa Norlas, director of the Children's Photography Archive, does a lot of work with participatory work with photography and children. So this is something that may be of interest here. There was one other comment about ethics, and in this case it was more to do with the population group that you're working with, Tricia, because it says here, I had a similar question about the ethics after my university ethics committee thought all older people are vulnerable. And that's an interesting one, because I'm again, in my own work, I'm talking a lot about, who gets to decide what's vulnerable. It's quite preposterous to think that I can say, well, this person is vulnerable, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And look, when I was doing my PhD research, I met a guy called George who was 103, and I was trying to get his informed consent. And I was telling him that potentially the images could be on the internet, and he'd never heard of the internet. He'd never examined the internet. And I had to explain to him exactly the reach that his photographs may be shown. They may be shown on a Zoom with you all 10 years later and things like that. It is interesting where the ethics committee do decide things being vulnerable or not. Yeah, as I say, that clear conversation and informed consent is, I think that's, it's everybody. It's everybody that we want to photograph. We do that. I'm doing another project at the moment, which has it took me a while to get through ethics, but is really the informed consent is really critical. So I'm doing an Australian version of an age authentic image library. So I'm training older photographers to go out and create authentic images of their peers for age authentic image library. And so explaining to people that we will be putting their images up on the internet where people can download them and use them is really, like, I feel like we need at least 5 conversations before we pick up a camera. And I think, just making sure that your participants really understand what they're walking into, and understand the nature of photographs, and the mechanical reproduction and the internet and things like that, because that's all really, really important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tricia. I really, really appreciate that. I have got one last question. That's my question, so I'm going to dive into that. Very briefly, you obviously come from an artistic background. You're a professional photographer, and you're doing this artist facilitation, from the vantage point of being a professional in that field. Do you think that we have to be that? Or how do you define this kind of space of an artist and a creative practice researcher? Can we be a creative practice researcher that's not a professional photographer, for example?
Absolutely. And I think, that's my work, is showing people how to use these methods without being a professional photographer. So when I run these photo walks, if it relied on being a professional photographer, it would live and die with me, because there's not people in community who are professional photographers to run these things. So I think having that spirit of inquiry, having that spirit of friendship and communication and sharing is really kind of what you need to run these things. As I say, we've all got these. Like, we've all got camera phones, so we are all photographers. Like, it's, I've got a friend that jokes about it endlessly when it says professional photographer. Well, I've got one of these. So, so I don't feel that you need to be creative to run these methods. It's just, consider it as you would any other research method. You want to do your research about the method, you want to practice, you want to investigate, you want to ask questions, you want to always be reflective and reflexive about your process.
Thank you very, very much, Tricia. And that's really quite exciting to hear, because I do think that it gives hope to people who don't feel that they are artists to actually be able to invade that space to some extent too.
That's exactly right. And that's the beauty of the medium. So it's funny, because as a professional photographer, I spend my life going, you don't need to be a professional photographer to create images. So I feel like I'm my own undoing. But I mean, that's beautiful. It's the most democratic of artwork, because we don't need to feel that we're creative, because we all do it every day. We all take photographs all of the time. It's right in front of us. So for me, that's what makes photography so beautiful. You've just got to learn how to listen, and that's why I call all of my work listening with
Images, yes.
because it is about listening to how people use their images, how people tell the stories through the images. It's not about how beautifully, I mean, and it's not about how beautiful the composition, things like that is. I mean, obviously some of my my participants really dive into learning that skill and want beautifulness, but it really is just about listening to how they use the photographs to say what they want to say.
Thank you so much. And actually, this is, I think, what the most powerful part of your presentation today was this image of Margaret, the nurse, who wants to be recognized as such. So I absolutely loved that part of your presentation. So thank you so much. I'm quite aware of the time, so I'm going to say thank you very, very much to everybody who's here. I am going to share one final slide. This is just an information as to what you know, where you can get us on the YouTube link and the practice Sprout and the website, etc., etc. We do have another one of these seminars coming up soon, so do keep an eye out for that. But for now, I would like to say thank you very, very much, Tricia, for your time and for your presentation. And it was a great, great pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I've put my email address and the link to my website in the chat. So please do reach out. I love talking about this method. I love talking about photography. It's what I live for. So I would love to have a dialogue to anyone who wants to reach out and have a chat with me as well. And thank you, Nicole, so much for having me. I really appreciate it.